I lived in a modest home in a small town with my mother and younger sister. When I was around 9 years old, in the summer, children would ride their bikes outside because the roadway was generally safe. However, there were still certain aspects of the house that didn't feel quite right. It was old, my mother used to say. Older homes also produce noise. However, not all of the things I recall from that era sounded like household sounds. They have a different sound. I'm still not entirely sure how to describe it. It all began one night when I was unable to fall asleep. I was marveling at the little glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling. While I lay in bed with a blanket drawn up to my chin, there was only a bed, a dresser, and a toy chest beside the window in my small room. From the trees outside, I recall observing the shadows on the wall. I convinced myself that the branches were swaying in response to the breeze. However, I then saw that one shadow wasn't traveling in the same way as the others. It was located close to my toy chest in the corner. I initially believed it to be one of my large plush animals or a stack of clothes. I thought I was just acting like a scared child, and I nearly laughed at myself. But then I blinked, and the shadow vanished. I recall feeling chilly, but not from the outside, but rather from within your body. I dozed out after pulling the blanket over my head. I didn't give it much thought until I saw my toy chest the following morning. It stood ajar, as if someone had been peering inside. Since my mother would yell if toys spilled out, I never left it open. I didn't say anything and closed it. My 5-year-old sister informed my mother a few weeks later that she didn't like the man in the closet. She said it so nonchalantly, as if it were a truth, that I essentially froze when she uttered it. My mother dismissed it with the remark, "Little children imagine things." However, I could tell by looking at my sister's face that she wasn't lying. She claimed that at night, he would stand in the closet and whisper, but she was unable to hear him. My mother did not inspect the closet, but she did speak to her that evening and pray with her. I heard something dragging across my floor later that night, like someone raking their nails across the wood. Andy woke up. The sound stopped near my bed, but I was too terrified to move. I was certain that something would be peering up at me if I peered over the side. I simply froze there, holding onto the blanket till I dozed off once more. Long scratches appeared on the floor beside my bed the following morning. They appeared to have been freshly cut into the wood. I recall rushing to show my mother, but she became upset. I must have been pulling furniture or playing with anything sharp, she said. She didn't trust me, even though I vowed I hadn't. The nights grew worse after that. From my closet, I would hear a faint whispering that sounded somewhat like a radio on a low level. My sister used to scream in her room sometimes, and when I came in, she would point to the corner and say, "He's there. He is present." I trusted her even though I never saw him. You know how it makes the hair on your arms stand up when someone is observing you? It felt like that. The spookiest night occurred during the winter months. My bedroom door was open when I woke up, despite the fact that I always close it. My mom left a hallway light on for us at night, so I could see it. However, the hall's light went off as I was watching. Perhaps the light bulb worked, I thought. After that, I heard footsteps moving down the corridor. They came to a stop outside my door. I wanted to yell for my mother, but I was unable to do so. When the door creaked, I noticed a tall, dark figure leaning in with only its head visible. I closed my eyes and acted as though I was sleeping. The door was shut and I was by myself when I opened them once more. I asked my mother if she had visited my room in the morning. "No," she said. She had spent the entire night in bed. According to my sister, she saw the man standing next to her bed once more. My mother finally showed signs of concern after we told her together. She prayed and lit a candle in every room in the house. After that, there was a brief period of silence, but it was short-lived. I once arrived home from school earlier than my mother one afternoon. Primera e Aldi, my room's toy chest slamming shut as I was working on my homework. While seated on the couch, the problem is that no one else was home. I thought it might be the wind, but when I went down the hallway, I noticed that my bedroom door was ajar. All of my toys were strewn all over the floor, as if someone had thrown them out, even though my toy chest was closed. I moved aside and waited for my mother to get home. She stated the cat knocked stuff over when I informed her, and she still didn't believe me. I questioned my mother if she had ever had any experiences in that place, years after we had moved out. She answered yes, after hesitating. She claimed that occasionally, when she woke up, she noticed a shadow in her doorway. She acknowledged that she thought there was a problem with the house, but claimed she never told us because she didn't want to frighten us. She claimed that she believed it to be a man who had once resided there. She didn't say much more, but I am aware of what my sister and I witnessed. I still get queasy thinking about that period of time as an adult. It was not a figment of the imagination. It wanted us to know that it existed and that it was real. I occasionally still hear the sound of nails running across the floor in the middle of the night when I am having trouble falling asleep. My mom had recently remarried, therefore, we needed more space. So when I was 10 years old, my family moved into a larger home. The house was lovely, newer than the one we had previously occupied, and it was in a tree-rich, peaceful neighborhood. I believed I would be content there. Everything appeared to be normal at first, but then I began to notice small details that gave me the impression that something was unquite right with the house. At the end of the hall was my bedroom. It included a deeper closet than the one I had before, as well as 2 large windows that looked out onto the garden. Up until the first night I stayed there, I enjoyed it. Around midnight, I heard something moving in the closet, which startled me. There was only a gentle shuffling sound, like clothes being pushed against one another, and no noise. I convinced myself it was just the house settling as I gazed at the closet. Even as youngsters, most people would assume that minor noises emanating from various places in a house are just normal household noises that you hear daily. I know this sounds corny. However, I suddenly noticed the door moving. It shook as if someone had lightly pressed on it from the inside, but it didn't swing open. I was cold, yet I wanted to hurry to my mom's room. I continued to stare into the closet until I fell asleep again. Even though I had closed the closet door tightly, it was slightly ajar the following morning. My mother denied going inside when I questioned her about whether she had. I knew it wasn't the air vents, but she suggested that they might have pushed it. The next nights became worse. I became aware of tapping on the window panes. I initially believed it to be tree branches, but upon closer inspection, I saw that there were none close to the glass. After several minutes, the tapping would stop when I covered my head with the blanket. I made an effort to ignore it, but one evening I did manage to peek out. A pale hand was pressing against the window, as I could see. The window was on the 2nd level, far too high for anyone to reach without a ladder, even though it was on the outside. For a long period, the hand simply pressed there without moving. Then it slowly slipped down and vanished. That night, I didn't get any sleep at all. My mother began giggling uncontrollably when I informed her. For a moment, she didn't believe me. She tried to persuade me that I was most likely half asleep and seeing things from my dream when she realized I wasn't just saying it as a joke or prank. However, I was aware that it was nonsense. My stepfather also didn't think I was real. He laughed at it and claimed that I was making it up for attention. However, I became aware that he left the hallway light on at night. Perhaps he didn't feel as secure as he claimed to. My 4-year-old younger brother began discussing the white lady a month later. He would claim that she entered his room and took a seat on his bed. My mother believed it was all in his head. However, I heard him yelling one evening. He was sobbing while snuggled up behind his blanket as I rushed in. He claimed that the white woman had been standing outside his door, simply staring at him, until he finally calmed down. Her eyes were entirely black, he claimed. What I had witnessed outside my window led me to believe him. I began placing the blanket over my head each night while I slept. However, the dreams persisted despite that. I also started having dreams about the white woman. She would whisper my name while standing in the corner of my room. Her speech sounded as dry as leaves grinding against one another. I would occasionally wake up to the faint but unmistakable sound of it. She was standing at my bed's foot when I woke up one night. I had never seen someone taller than her. Her head nearly made contact with the ceiling. Despite the stillness of the air, her long white garments swayed. Her face was as pale as chalk, and her hair was stringy and black. She had black holes in her eyes. Nothing came out when I tried to yell. She was gone when I opened my eyes after closing them. However, my closet door was ajar. I was unable to enter my closet after that. I pleaded with my mother to let me sleep in her room, but she told me I needed to develop my bravery. She probably didn't want to acknowledge that she was afraid either. The stormy night was the worst. Strong winds and a lot of rain. My window was creaking when I woke up. The window was slowly opening when I looked. I could see the lock turning on its own. Even though it was locked, I watched the white woman climb in when the window fully opened. She didn't have a human gait. She bobbed. She never put her feet on the ground. She moved in the direction of my bed and lowered herself until her face was directly in front of mine. Her icy breath touched my skin. I yelled as loudly as I could when she spoke my name once more. The window was secured and closed, and there was nobody else inside when my mom and stepdad ran in and turned on the light. They screamed at me for frightening everyone, but I could see they were anxious by the expressions on their faces. The strange thing about that section of the narrative is that I couldn't really recall what transpired between my yelling and the moment I saw the woman floating towards me. The only way I can describe it is that I briefly lost consciousness before recalling yelling and my parents rushing into the room. People might assume it was merely a night fright because my window was closed once more. My parents thought it was that way. I believe that out of concern for me, my mother began taking me to therapy for a while. I never grew accustomed to the house, even though we stayed there for 3 more years. I believe that my brother's lack of conversation about the White Lady was due to his fear rather than her ceasing to visit. At night, I would occasionally hear him sobbing and yelling, "Go away." I believe that he simply did not want to be coerced into attending therapy. I still feel afraid to get out of bed to use the restroom or fetch water during nighttime storms. ILL. Take a quick look in the room. Ask corners to make sure nothing tall is hiding there. It demonstrates how these types of things persist throughout maturity. If I had unseen a hand on my window before my younger brother even brought up the White Lady, I might be more willing to accept that it was just night terrors. This must be one of those strange events that defy explanation. I used to ride my bike every day after school when I was 8 years old. There were large trees and modest homes on the calm street where I resided. I discovered every nook and cranny of the pavement. I discovered the mailman's stop. There was a house nearby that I liked. To see the yard, I had to ride close to the block's corner. There was a broad grass and a lengthy driveway. On most afternoons, an elderly guy would stand in that driveway. He would always stand where the driveway and sidewalk meet and gaze down the street while sporting a hat. He would greet me as I passed. He never set foot on the pavement. He didn't ever leave his driveway. After shouting and waving, he would return to keeping an eye on his yard. I always returned to the wave. I never crossed the street to speak to the man directly, because my mother had warned me not to do so. The man was aware of that. From his home, he would call me and inquire about school. He would inquire about my bicycle. He inquired as to whether I liked my new red bike's bell. He even made me chuckle once when he told me a joke about a cat. We conversed in a way for weeks. The talks were brief. They were always from the curb to his driveway. He seemed to be aware of minor details about me without my having to tell him. For instance, the fact that my dad purchased a new automobile and I had a younger sibling. I never mentioned these things to him. I assumed he was just a neighbor who kept an eye on the street and might have noticed us from across the street or something. I acquired a brand new bike one day. As I already stated, it was red with a gleaming bell. As I slowly went down the block, he exclaimed, "Nice bike." If I wanted to dash to the corner, he asked, my mother would be upset, so I told him no. With a smile, he remarked. One day, we then discussed trivial matters. After telling me about a bird that enjoyed his fence, he explained a rule that said one should never walk on a particular stone. He then related a tale to me about a dog that never failed to return with a slipper. He gave off the impression of someone with leisure to observe trivial things. While riding my bike, I began searching for him. He was present on some afternoons and absent on others. Then he stopped coming out after a week. There was nobody standing beside the house when I rode past it. The front window's curtains were drawn. It seemed strange not to see the man in the driveway when I slowed down and glanced at it. Asking my mother if I could cross the street was something I wanted to do. "No," she said. She warned that children should not be left unattended on the road. In any case, I noticed a woman in that house's backyard a few days later. It was the first time I had ever seen anyone in the yard. To view her, right around the corner. I had to guess that she was watering flowers back there, because she had her hair tied up and was holding a watering can. To avoid getting too close to her, I stopped my bike as I was riding down the street. As usual, I wanted to phone the person across the street, but I chose not to. I am not sure if I was too bashful or afraid of my mother's reaction, if I stayed out too late. However, it didn't appear that the woman noticed me any more than I did. The woman was on the back porch when I rode past again a few days later. In her hands was a mug. I watched for a while sitting on my bike. She then proceeded around the house after opening a little side entrance. I waited where the sidewalk twisted after making my way slowly to the corner in order to make sure my mother wasn't outside. I glanced down the block. I then made the hasty decision to cross the street, as if my life depended on it. I crossed and pressed my pedals. Up close, the house appeared larger. The driveway was lengthy and sloping toward the street. I had the impression that I was not permitted to be there. At the end of the driveway, close to the rear gate, I came to a stop. I was heard by the woman. A young guy riding a red bike was standing at the gate as she turned around. She appeared startled, but not upset. She asked me why I was back there after approaching the gate and opening it. When I rode my bike past the man in the driveway, he used to say hello. I informed her. I informed her that he was aware of my name and that he had promised to race me sometime. She replied that the man I described sounded like her spouse after wiping her hands on her frock as if she had been working. She didn't grin, which surprised me, because I thought she might say something like, "He went on a trip, or is inside, and she'll go get him." He had passed away the previous year, she said. He passed away in his chair, she said. Harold was his name. A chilly void appeared in my chest. I inquired as to whether she had a photo. I was hoping to see him. After going inside, she came back with a tiny frame. The man in the picture had the same hat and wide smile. In fact, he looked a lot like the man I had always seen. The woman went on to say that the picture was brand new, having been taken just a few years prior. She claimed that since he was a young man, her spouse had a scar across his cheek. When I closely examined the image, I saw that the man had a thin, pale scar running from his jaw to his ears. The man on the driveway came back to me. He was scar-free. He had flawless skin and a round, unadorned face. The scar did not match, but the hat and smile did. I told her that, although I believed the man had rubbed his cheek once, I had once noticed a mark on his face. She claimed that although the scar had been there for a while, he occasionally covered it up with stubble. She reiterated that the house was empty and that her spouse had passed away. She claimed that she had never seen or heard anyone standing in the driveway, since she had moved back there last summer to tend to the garden. At this point, I must admit, I started to feel a little afraid. After thanking her, I retreated down the driveway. I didn't turn to face the yard once more. I parked the bike in the garage and cycled slowly home. The bike ride back was similar to how you drive home. The remaining distance in solitude with the radio off after nearly getting into a car accident. When I arrived home, my mother didn't ask me any questions. She simply warned me to exercise caution. I had trouble sleeping that night. The man with the cap was on my mind. I considered how he uttered my name and how he laughed, and the scar in the picture sprang to mind. When I passed the house the following day, the curtains were open. The driveway and porch were illuminated by the sun, but nobody was there. I walked away after waving from the corner and getting no response. Nothing else happened for a while. I made an effort to forget. On my bike, I discovered new paths. I conversed with children on other blocks. Weeks went by. Then one night, I heard my name when I woke up. Someone outside the home near my window made the sound. It was a familiar voice. It pronounced my name as the man on the other side of the street used to. My head began to spin as soon as I sat up quickly. Outside, over the faint sound of rainfall, I could definitely hear my name being called over and over. I yelled for my mom and then covered myself with the covers to hide. She hurried in and took a seat by the bed. I explained the voice outside my window to her. She gave me a back rub and explained that it was the wind. She went to the window and raised the blinds to cheer me up. I went over to check myself. She mentioned that nobody was out there. My mother was correct, except for the slight rain that was falling outdoors. My dad stood up and made sure the doors and windows were locked. I felt better when he used a flashlight to check outside. No one was out there, they said. When I claimed that I had heard a voice, they said that I had dreamed it, which is perhaps the most common response a parent would give to a terrified child. My throat ached the following morning from the previous night's yelling. My school buddies made fun of me for suggesting that I believed in ghosts when I informed them. I was challenged by a friend to stand in that house, his driveway at night, and yell his name. I didn't accept that challenge. Nothing happened for days, so I decided to go on. The street altered as the years passed. For a short time, the woman's house was vacant as other homes sold. I once witnessed movers removing boxers. Later on, the front was being painted by fresh artists. There were new cars in the long driveway, but it was still there. I didn't search for a man in a hat as I passed. I became older. I discovered alternative paths. I became familiar with the names of my new neighbor's dogs. Finally, when I was 18, I left home to attend college. My parents sold that house when I was a college student, so I never returned. But that man's recollection nags at my breast like a tiny stone. I question why I didn't follow up with the woman to get more information or ask for additional photos. I suppose I was afraid to question whether I had been speaking to a ghost at that very moment. It was a long time before I crossed that street again. Later in life, I shared the tale with a few individuals, and they even questioned why I had Yuan followed up with that woman to ask her additional questions, or why I had Yuan told her what I remembered. They might have been correct. Perhaps I ought to have shown more courage. I was 8 years old, so perhaps I should have inquired further about the scar, or requested to see a wedding picture. That wasn't actually how I was thinking. I drove down the street a few years back, purely for fun. Near the corner, a kid was riding a bike. There was nobody in the driveway. I briefly considered stopping. I wanted to know whether anyone had said hello while standing there. If anyone else has heard a voice, please let me know. I was hoping for a brief response that would bridge the gap. I didn't stop, though. I simply continued to drive. The recollection remains the same, and I now make every effort to repress it.